What's up, headbangers? Welcome to another episode of the Talk Louder podcast, where we geek out on all things rock and roll. Hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Leave us your likes and comments. You can also leave likes and comments on our Facebook page. Follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Instagram at talklouder_podcast, and our website, talklouderpodcast.com, where you'll find links to our merch and all of our previous episodes. I'm Metal Dave Glessner, along with my co-host Jason McMaster. And today we are honored to be joined by a guy who unquestionably altered the history of heavy metal. I think it's fair to say. Our guest today is Brian Slagel, the founder and CEO of Metal Blade Records, the label that famously gave us the first commercial recordings of Metallica, Slayer, Ratt. I mean, it goes on and on.
Armored Saint, Trouble.
Lizzy Borden, Cannibal Corpse, Fate's Warning. I mean,
go, baby, go.
On and on and on.
Yep.
Black and Blue. A lot of history, and your record collection probably owes a serious debt of gratitude to Mr. Slagel. Can't believe we got him on the show today, and he was so cool to talk to. Just a really chill dude. He's one of us. He said at the end of the interview that he can't believe that the time went by as quickly as it did because the conversation was just flowing and so natural, because he's a nerd just like us. He's a heavy metal rock and roll nerd.
That's the best kind of nerd there is.
Yeah. And obviously he took his passion and turned it into an empire. And he's got two books. The second one just came out. It's called Swing of the Blade. And the previous one came out in 2017. It's called For the Sake of Heaviness. Both of these books chronicle Brian's life and career and stories and anecdotes with some of the artists that have been signed to his label.
They're both really great.
No question. Lars Ulrich wrote the foreword to the first one, and Kerry King wrote the foreword to the second one. So if you had any doubt about Brian Slagel's Rolodex
or even credibility.
Yeah.
These are people he was able to just,
text,
call him up and go, dude, is that cool?
Yeah. So we had a lot of fun talking to him. Of course, he first came on most people's radar with the Metal Massacre compilation albums. I don't know. I think that's up to 13 or 14 or something at this point.
Yeah, I haven't looked at any kind of discography. I want to say that's why, I'm embarrassed that the plastic sleeve on the at least the protective cover is wasted, but the my first pressing of Metal Massacre 1 is in quite good shape.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, as he mentions, the records, the compilations were basically just an offshoot of his fanzine that just happened to catch.
The New Heavy Metal Review. For those headbangers out there who have the very first Metal Massacre comp, the first record to ever come out on Metal Blade says presented by the New Heavy Metal Review, which was just his fanzine. I have to give a shout out to John Perez from Solitude Eternus, Rotting Corpse fame, there in the DFW area, who sent me this. It's been a few years ago now, but I have to admit this is my only copy of this. But the reason I needed it, I begged and cried to find is I love the Starfighters, and he's got. I mean, who knows who the Starfighters are? Well, you know what? Brian Slagel knew who they were before anybody else did, it looks like.
Right.
But yeah, by the way, the Starfighters guitar player, Stevie Young, he's in this band called AC/DC now.
True.
Playing, yes. His uncle is Angus. His uncle's over there playing guitar.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not his uncle. His great uncle. Who knows? Anyway, yeah. So Brian Slagel. We talk about Metal Blade bands all the time. We do not preface the bands with, they're a Metal Blade band. As much as we probably should give the credit to them. The first 3 Slayer records were on Metal Blade. The first 3 Trouble records were on Metal Blade. Fate's Warning, it goes and goes and goes. He's been this sort of guy that has been able, as a fan, to catapult on some sort of fan base level, much like in this interview with Brian, you even recall that it's kind of like the tape trading scene was in the early 80s. And he was a vital part of that. I'll just say on the West Coast, him and Ron Cantano, was in the Bay Area, and Brian being down in Los Angeles. So him like accidentally meeting this kid, Lars Ulrich, one day, kind of changed, it kind of threw everything into motion, because obviously Ron was friends with Lars as well at the same time. How they met was probably tape trading. So
Yeah.
this whole like networking thing going on, pre-cell phone, computer, everything analog, licking stamps, and a long distance phone call on a landline an hour, and he talks about this, was up to $100 or more, which I'm well aware of. Thanks, Mom, wherever you are, for paying the phone bill, because I was calling my favorite rock stars all the time who I had their phone number. Yeah, so today, just I'm all over the place because obviously I'm excited. Brian is he's still kind of an unsung, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I feel like he's still underground. He's not to me. He's on our radar our entire fucking heavy metal lives for the past 40 years. But when you really think about it, he's not really the household name, but people own Slayer's catalog. They don't know who Brian is, right?
Right. I just love the fact that here's a guy that took his passion. You and I have a passion for this stuff. All of our listeners have a passion for this stuff. But very few of us turn it into a monster and grow it into an empire. And Brian has, and he's done so with integrity. He takes a great deal of pride in ownership of the name Metal Blade Records. There's been opportunities for him to sell out to a major, and he hasn't, because it's important for him to maintain the integrity of his vision. And I think that's fantastic. And the bands that launched from his label, Metallica, Slayer, Armored Saint, and others, still hold him as a close personal friend. There's a friendship there. There's a camaraderie there that I think is very rare in the music business. And I think it's because of a genuine sense of loyalty and a genuine sincerity to push this music forward. And they appreciate each other's love for it and what they contribute to it.
Big time. And this is something that we didn't really get to talk about with him, that I will mention, that it's a recurring point in the new book, Swinging the Blade. When bands start on Metal Blade and then they get the major deal, and then the major deal doesn't work out so hot for them, guess who they call? They call Brian, and Brian is open arms. I'm here. I've been here the whole time. You leave and come back as many times as you want. Says a lot. Also, I want to piggyback that with, did you know, David, the name of the label, Metal Blade, is like he talks about it a little bit about, like when he started Death Records, the crossover side of Metal Blade, it's like bands were afraid to sign to a label that was called Metal Blade. Yeah, it's too metal, and we do something that's not, people are going to think we're just like, Manowar or something.
Yeah.
No, they're not, but I understand what DRI doesn't sound like Manowar. The point is that he's ready to work with you because he believes in you no matter what. So without further ado, really a pleasure and an honor, as Dave said, for us to talk to, I could almost say kind of he probably will hate this, kind of a hero, at least an underground hero.
Yeah.
Who is championing something so much bigger than all of us. And it goes back to that nerd thing, where he's the guy that was spending his lunch money to make a fanzine because he loved heavy metal. He was charging $1. It didn't make any money. He doesn't care. I I can't say enough about it. Super excited today. Brian Slagel, CEO, heavy metal fan, among many hockey fan, among many other entrepreneur, former record store slave, Mr. Brian Slagel, today on the Talk Louder podcast.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you guys?
Great.
First off, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Pretty rad. We're both super high on this.
Cool.
Yeah. Honor to have you with us, man. Jason and I say it quite often that our record collections are often shaped by a lot of the artists and bands that we admire. But I think we might owe the biggest debt of gratitude to you. And you're not even a musician. So I think that speaks volumes about your contribution and the reach of your work.
He wrote some lyrics one time.
Oh,
yeah.
That's true.
Kind of like you, Dave. You wrote some lyrics a few times.
I did.
Demon Flight.
Demon Flight. Where is that?
So that was the either third or fourth release we put out. A friend of mine who was a bass player, actually Frank Zappa's band. When I was putting together stuff for Metal Massacres, he had a band. I said, "Yeah, I need a band. Why not?" And then he said, "I got free studio time. I could probably do an EP." So I'm like, "All right." But he didn't have lyrics for a song, so I wrote the lyrics for one song.
Wow. Nice. I was going to ask because, you've obviously built this empire out of your record label, but I was going to ask if you also play. Are you a musician of any sort?
I play nothing.
Nothing.
I can barely do a 4/4 beat on the drums, and that's about the extent of it. I can't play anything. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I couldn't play. I tried, but I have no talent at all for playing an instrument.
I can totally relate. I'm a music freak myself, and I realized early on that I was never going to be the guy on stage. So my way of staying involved in the scene was to become a journalist and write about it. So I totally get it when you have the passion for the music, but maybe you're not going to be the musician. You find another avenue to participate and still be a part of it.
Basically, yes.
Yeah, totally relate to that.
The many hats that you've worn over the years is a bit staggering when you just kind of think about, oh, well, he's a musician too, and he does. It's like, do you feel like you've worn enough hats?
Yeah, I'm trying to check them all off, right? The bucket list of things to do that I certainly never thought I would do. The only thing that I'll probably never be able to check off is playing any sort of instrument on any sort of a record. I've done background vocals, but that's about as far as it goes.
You and Dave are becoming the same guy.
Yeah.
Same dude.
I noticed when I was doing my research, there was so many things. It's like I usually try to contain my questions and have some sort of sequential theme. But with Brian, there's just so much that he's done, and something new and interesting was hitting me at every turn. And I just went, you know what? I'm just going to put some notes down on paper. And if I miss something, I miss something, because you're never going to cover it all, and we'll make the most of it. But I did enjoy the fact that we do have some commonalities. You share a birthday with my son, number one. You're a Valentine's baby.
Nice. There's not a whole lot of us, so that's good to know. He must be a good kid, hopefully.
He's a great kid.
He's a great kid, man.
Maybe one day you'll sign him, because he's got a lot more musical talent than I do.
Never know.
He's quick becoming a great player and multi-instrumentalist. I think his heart's drums, don't you say, Dave, with that new drum kit? You just saved your lunch money to buy him.
It was more than lunch money, but yeah. And then Brian and I also share the opinion that The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden is the greatest metal album of all time.
Well, that's incorrect.
No, okay.
It's the greatest album of all time.
Oh, I love it. So why is that? Because I fell in love with that record the minute I heard it. It came out in 1982, and I'm 56 years old now, and nothing to this day has topped it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, first of all, Iron Maiden's my favorite band of all time. And they just, to me, encapsulate everything I would want in a heavy metal band, just from the music to the lyrics to the imagery to Eddie, just everything that they do, live. They're just, everything is, I can't say that anything is wrong with them, especially at that time and place. And the interesting thing about that record, you guys are old enough to remember this, is that when Paul Di'Anno left, a lot of people were not very happy that Bruce was going to replace him. And furthermore, when Number of the Beast came out, I'd say 50% of the Iron Maiden fans were like, I don't like that. I like Di'Anno's stuff better. I don't like the new record. But I was a huge fan of Samson, which was Bruce's band prior to being in Iron Maiden. So I already was a big fan of his voice, and I thought he would be perfect in that record. And that bands, if you look at the history of you pick any great band or artist really. Usually the third record is kind of when they hit their strides. Second and third records are the ones where they really hit their strides and kind of I don't want to say peak, because they've put out a lot of great music since then, but they kind of find their way, I guess. And that was the thing for that Maiden album to me. The songs were tremendous, the imagery was tremendous, Bruce sounded phenomenal. Martin Birch, who I think is the greatest producer ever, made it sound incredible. And just the songs are just, How Be Thy Name is still my all-time favorite song. So, it just kind of, everything just fell into place on that record.
These are quips also. I've got like 5 more pages. You can tell I've been busy. I've got like 5 more pages in your latest book, Swing of the Blade, of course. And I'm just like, pretty much every chapter, I won't say every page, because, I could say every page. I'm just like championing everything that you've got going on. Now, Dave's more of the sports guy than I am, but just in the first book too, which I've just kind of thumbed through this, and I felt like I wanted to get into the newer book. Solely because you sold me the newer book by words that were, I believe they were your words, that the first book didn't really have you hanging out in your person on person relationships with people in the bands that you've worked with, whether you signed them or not, which I thought was, I wouldn't say missing from this book, but just weren't covered, because it was kind of, this is more like, you talk about your mom.
Yeah.
You talk about,
Yeah, sorry.
No.
The first book, and again, being an author is something I didn't necessarily think I would do. Although we also share I thought I was going to be a journalist as well. I started the fanzine. I wrote for Kerrang. I wrote for Sounds, and I kind of thought I was going to be a journalist until I took this crazy left turn. But so I wouldn't say that writing a book was out of my range necessarily, but I didn't really ever anticipate something like that happening. And then the opportunity came to do the history, and I was like, well, I might as well do it. Well, I still have some coherency to try to tell the story, but unbeknownst to me, and quite humbling, was the first book did way better than I ever thought it was going to be, and the response and reaction was, like I said, very humbling and really pretty amazing. Well, the one thing that everybody was asking for was like, more in-depth stories about, some of the bands, and they all wanted to hear more about obscure bands that, they didn't really talk about it. There was enough of a momentum, I guess. And I got up to our publisher and everything else, and there was enough momentum. They said, yeah, if you want to do another book, probably be a good idea. So, so I did the second book, Swing of the Blade. And it's more, like you said, it's more, there's a whole chapter on, Iron Maiden, and there's a chapter on, Fate's Warning and Armor Saint and King Diamond and Mercyful Fate, it's kind of more stories about all of those bands, and amongst a bunch of other things as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about you like 17 and 18 years old. Were you already working Oz Records at that point? At what point? Okay, what point did you start there? What point did you start this fine piece of history here?
Yeah. So, so I was 17.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian. For our listeners and not watchers, I'm holding up the new heavy metal review of April of 1982, number 8. It cost $1, and it has one of my favorite dirty old rock and roll bands, Starfighters album cover on the front.
Wow.
Carry on, Brian.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I was hanging out with a few people last night, talking about, music and just listening to old music and stuff. And so I was telling them the story when I was 17, it was 1978. And that was the first year that I had a car and I had the approval from my mom to go to concerts. So I can't remember if it was 78 or 79. One of those 2 years, I went to over 250 concerts. I went to everything that was possible, because I was also a bootlegger, or as I like to call, a tape trader.
Yeah.
So I'd, sneak the thing in, sneak a tape recorder into the shows, tape them, and then trade them around the world to get more tapes of all my favorite bands. And at some point, I did sell a few of them, basically to fuel my record habit, because we didn't have much money, and I was working at Sears. I think when I was 18, I was working at Sears, so didn't have a lot of money. So the extra income, all I did was buy more records with it. So I didn't really get involved in anything. Like the fanzine came out in 81, so I would have been 19, I guess.
Okay.
But what I was doing was going to a lot of shows, and I was getting into slowly getting into the scene. And in 79, obviously, when the new British heavy metal thing happened, that's when it really started to get into it. And the first foray of the future, I guess, was my friend John at first, his chance meeting with Lars Ulrich in the parking lot of the Michael Schenker show in 1980. And we became very good friends because we were all into the new wave of British heavy metal, and all young kids. And luckily for me, being in Los Angeles, I was able to get Sounds, which was the big English magazine, and I was able to read about some of these bands. And we had a handful of record stores that would bring in a couple of things. So the three of us the Three Musketeers, I guess, would drive all over the place and try to buy whatever we could of that scene. So becoming friends with him, and he had just moved from Denmark to Southern California, and he had no idea that there were these other two kids that were into the same music he was. He just thought he was going to be out of it. So we formed this friendship, and of course that led to quite big things for him.
Oh yeah,
and reasonably good things for me as well. But that was the first thing. But I didn't get to the first step was the fanzine that I started putting out in 1981. So I would have been 18 at that point, and then. And then the fanzine, and that kind of led into me writing for Sounds. Well, actually, the fanzine didn't really lead to the record store. I just was, I was a record store rat, I guess you would say. I just would hang out at all these record stores. There's a really great record store down the street from where I lived in Woodland Hills called Oz, O-Z. And, I would be in there all the time buying whatever I could. And yeah, there it is.
The full page back cover of your own fanzine.
Yeah, well, I had to because
there's some really great stuff in this issue. There's a full ad for Black and Blue. I mean, the guys in Kiss, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, a bunch of ads for Motley in those.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just locked into getting the job at the record store. I talk about it in, I think, the first book probably. But my best friend was working there, and they were going to get rid of him, and they asked me if I wanted the job. So it's kind of like, I don't know what I do. It's, my best friend, and I don't want to steal a job from him. So I thought about it for 10 minutes. I'm like, but this is my dream. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So I started with the record store. Then I was starting to write more for Sounds, and then Kerrang. I was helping to program the local heavy metal radio show on KMET, which is the big rock radio station in LA at the time. And and then then I started to find out that there were heavy metal bands playing in LA, and that kind of led to the compilation album and the rest.
So when you're writing,
I'm sorry, Dave, you seem to be blown away that there was a band like near your relative's house, by way of Sirathungal.
Yeah.
it kind of like shocked you that what that's where
Well,
I grew
yeah,
up.
I mean, it was
Thanksgiving.
they were such a, I mean, that's one of my favorite stories, and I talk about them in both books. But yeah, they were just this little band up in Ventura, California. Ventura, California in 1981 was just this sleepy little beach town. There was basically a two-way, one row, one lane one way and one lane the other way from, LA or Woodland Hills where I was at up there. But I had my grandmother and aunts lived up there. Never expected a heavy metal band would come from there. And then sure enough, this band, Sirthung, put out a record on their own in 1980, I think it was. And we sold it in the store. And then we went on to work with them, and I always loved them and thought they were really great, but they never fit into the LA scene. Never really fit in anywhere because really, I mean, you have to listen to it. It's progressive and kind of there's some hippie quality to it, maybe, but it's still very, very metal. But they've had this crazy renaissance for all these years later. All of a sudden, just out of nowhere, I would see kids wearing Sirthungel shirts at European festivals in like 2004 or whatever. And I was like, wow, that's really crazy because I always loved them, but I didn't know any. All these Europeans first discovered them just through the fact that you could listen to pretty much anything musically you wanted to, and they just discovered them. It kind of led to this big cult following, and even people that didn't like them in the first place, like my good friend Monty Connor, who was A&R guy from Roadrunner Records, signed Sepultura and a ton of amazing bands, and he didn't like them at all. He sent me, I forget when it was, probably 10 years ago or something. He sent me this note, but and I was completely wrong on Sirthungel. They're amazing now. I love everything. It just, I guess they aged well and time came around.
I think that you're once you grow up a little bit and I only like this kind of music or this kind of metal. I missed out on so much cool shit because I had blinders on, for a while. If it wasn't Mercyful Fate, Slayer, Metallica, yada, Megadeth, whatever, keep going, Thrashy, Exodus, whatever, and Dark Angel, and just keep going, Hyrax, whatever. I wasn't into it, and then I realized one day I just went boom, and I was like, man, I'm cheating myself out of so much good shit, and I believe that the Renaissance and the resurgence and the newer versions of these older bands have resold the old catalog, repurposed your parts of your brain that you were just shut the fuck off for so many years. And I feel that's a beautiful thing.
100%. I was never that guy. Like I was, from maybe, I mean, I didn't really grow up in a music household or thing. I had a stepdad for a couple of years, and he was into like Johnny Cash and Jerry Reed. So that was kind of my only real musical thing. And, my mom played the piano and sang at church, and, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
So my music thing was kind of all over the place. I got really into Elton John, then I got Kiss, and I got AC/DC, and then, all the heavier stuff, obviously. But I kind of like everything.
Sounds familiar. That sounds very familiar. So,
but I always liked everything. So in the metal world, I always thought it was really, I didn't like the fact that you couldn't like Slayer and Queensryche at the same time. It's like, well, they're both great bands. It doesn't matter that they're not doing the same thing. But there was a lot of boundaries in the metal world, all the way really up until Faith No More. Faith No More, I think, was the one that kind of shattered everything. And all of a sudden, everybody could like them, and now you could open up to saying like, oh well. And then you find all these people that were closet fan, big fans of Slayer, Metallica. That were closet fans of all these other bands that that like actually like Queensryche or something. So but I always liked everything. So that's why the Metal Blade, we have a crazy variety of roster. We have everything from Mother Feather to Cannibal Corpse. So it kind of goes everywhere.
I feel the word crossover, like you were there when that word kind of like sort of like cracked open the egg, and I saw a lot of that going on down in Texas, and in that shit between 82 and 86 and even later. I just saw that start to slowly crumble and become unbelievably huge. And I believe that crossover is still happening when you kind of think about the late 80s and early 90s with bands like Faith No More, like you mentioned, because it's like it's kind of metal and it's kind of funky, and there's heavy keyboards and there's riffage everywhere, and Jim Martin he's playing metal guitar amidst this hurricane.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting because, you mentioned the word crossover, and that, DRI, which is one
yeah,
of the bands we signed, that was the title of their whatever third or fourth record, I forget which one. So they kind of, they didn't coin the phrase, but they kind of, put it out into the public. And it was funny because, I love DRI and COC, and they're two, punk bands in the mid '80s. I went to both of them and said, hey, I'd love to sign you guys. And we can't sign with you. I said, well, why not? This is because the name of the label is Metal Blade. You guys are a heavy metal label. We can't do that because this was still a time in the mid '80s where punk rock and heavy metal were not friends at all. And I grew up in LA watching punk. I went to all those LA punk shows: Black Flag, the Go-Go's, Wall of Voodoo, the Dead Kennedys from San Francisco would come down every weekend. They're my favorite punk band X. I loved all that stuff, so I loved the punk stuff. And Slayer and Metallica specifically. Anthrax, like all the big four, all the thrash bands, all loved punk, and I think that element to what they were doing made them a little bit more unique. And they love. I mean, I saw DRI because Slayer knew who they were, and they opened for Slayer once, and that's when I went to sign them. So anyway, long story short, I said, well, what about if I start another label with a different name? Would you sign? And they said, sure. So that's when I started Death Records, and we signed DRI, COC, Dr. No, The Mentors. Cryptic Slaughter, and Goo Goo Dolls.
Yeah.
When it started.
super fun time.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the Goo Goo Dolls because I am a huge fan of the Goo Goo Dolls and specifically the stuff on Metal Blade Records. I remember a buddy of mine, Danny Hoekstra, turned me on to the Jed album, and I thought it was the greatest thing I ever heard. And from there, I went to Hold Me Up and my favorite, Superstar Car Wash. And at that time, I was familiar with, the Slayer and the Metallica stuff that you're putting out and the Mercyful Fate. And you're known, like you said, as a metal label. And the Goo Goo Dolls, to me, especially, well, definitely at that point in their career, were more of this scrappy barroom, barely keeping it together punk rock band. And so I was going to ask, how did you come to sign them? Were you looking to expand your roster or what? How did the Goo Goo Dolls come onto your radar?
Well, there's no rhyme or reason to anything we sign. It's just if I like it, we'll sign it. It doesn't really matter where it comes from, what type of music it is, what type of anything. It's kind of more or less the same way today, although the staff has more autonomy to sign stuff as long as I approve it. Well, with the Goo Goo Dolls, so Mike Faley, who's worked at Metal Blade forever, is from Buffalo, New York. So he was good friends of a lot of people in Buffalo, New York, and the master tracks where the Goos were recording. He was friends with the engineer there, and then also
Billy Sheehan's roommate, I believe.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And Mike still manages Billy Sheehan to this day. Actually,
Oh, that's right.
yeah. So then William Howell, who's now known as DJ Will, was an A&R guy at Metal Blade at the time too, and he at literally at the same time they had both kind of discovered the Goo Goo Dolls within, I don't know, a week or something. Separately, I think it was. So they came to me and said, "Hey, this band from Buffalo, the Goo Goo Dolls," and they played me their stuff, and I thought, this is great, let's do it. So we ended up signing them, and I love those guys. They were the early Goo Goo Dolls, the records that you mentioned, the Jed, Hold Me Up, and Superstar Car Wash. They're such great records, and they're so much fun live. One of the most fun live bands ever. They were just and great guys and just super fun. But we kind of felt that there's something here, like they could really kind of go beyond. And it's funny because in the last week I've talked a lot about the Goo Goo Dolls with a couple of things that I'll mention. Like last night I was talking with a couple of friends of mine who one guy who's a manager of a bunch of bands, lives in Vegas, that I hadn't met before. And we had a similar transition, a similar trajectory in music, like same favorite bands, same times, all this sort of stuff. So we're talking about the Goo Goo Dolls last night and how much he loved them. And I was telling the story, so maybe pre-pandemic, so right before the pandemic, like 4 years ago, I was watching Sunday Night Football on NBC, and the Buffalo Bills were playing, so they played like a bump track out of old Goo Goo Dolls. I had to rewind it from it. I go, I think that's old Goo Goo Dolls. So I rewound. I go, oh yeah, it's something off Superstar Car Wash. And I hadn't listened to that record for like 10 years. So back and listen to that record. And first of all, it's great, if I say so myself.
Yes.
But second of all, it sounds so much like the Foo Fighters. So much like the Foo Fighters.
Interesting.
Like, holy cow. Yeah. So next time I see Dave Grohl, I got to go, so Goo Goo Dolls, tell me about that.
So the Foo Foo Dolls.
Well,
yeah.
there was
Goo
another.
Fighters.
Another one of your signings that I always thought was curious, and even more so because we're from Texas and from Austin specifically, and we're friends with these guys. What do you remember about
Oh,
Johnny Law?
love them. So we were, that was early 90s, and we were at, we'd done this deal with Warner Brothers, so we're the major label. So it kind of, made our horizons a little bit broader in terms of the bands that we want to sign. And I love stuff like that. I love that band. And they were one of those bands, like the wrong place at the wrong time, basically. I think if they would have come along 3 years later, because I mean, they were more or less the Black Crowes before the Black Crowes were the Black Crowes. And the most interesting thing about that record is the producer on that record, the first record he ever produced, is Brendan O'Brien, who now has gone on to, superstardom as a producer. That was the first record he ever did. And he did a great job on that record. But, just like a lot of things, they were too early for what they were doing. They didn't really have proper management, and, all the pitfalls of why bands don't become successful, they unfortunately had it. And like I said, I think if they would have come along a couple of years later, that probably would have been way more into what they were doing. Like, great record, and very, if you haven't heard it before and you want to hear it, it should be up on all the streaming stuff. But it's definitely Black Crowes-ish.
Yeah. Eric Larson lives a stone's throw away from me, from where I'm sitting right now. So
Please tell him I said hello.
I will. So you obviously built an empire out of this record label, and you said at one point early in the conversation, you went from this fanzine, and as you put it, then you took this crazy left turn. When you took that crazy left turn, did you have any sort of business acumen or any sort of mentor in the world of business and finance and that sort of thing? Or were you completely flying by the seat of your pants?
Was pretty much flying by the seat of my pants. I mean, I didn't graduate college. I'd gone 2 years, and basically I was almost going to get my AA degree, but I dropped out because I was doing the label and 4,000 other things. But I took a few business courses, so that helped a little bit. But an early person that was really helpful to me, and our distributor Green World was, I brought them both Motley Crue and Ratt, so they liked me, obviously. So they were helpful because I was just, a dumb kid and didn't really know much about anything. They were the ones that gave me the pressing and distribution deal because I had no money to do anything, and I barely was able to get that first Metal Massacre together. So they helped a little bit, but our lawyer, which is kind of funny because he started really day one. Like, I put out the compilation now, and I didn't have any contracts or anything. He was just starting his law firm and this little office above the record store. And he said, "You have a lawyer?" I said, "I can't afford a lawyer." So, "Well, I'll be your lawyer for like $10 an hour or something." Well, I probably afford that. So he's been our lawyer for day one. He's now reps every major producer known to man, and people. The guy who wrote half of Adele's songs, the guy who writes, produces Morgan Wallen, like big time stuff. Wow. But he had become friends with this guy, Mike Harrison, who ended up starting a talk radio magazine that was like the Bible of the talk radio circuit. I forget what the name of it is now, but Bill had known him, and he was a local radio guy, and pretty famous in LA. He was a little bit older, and for whatever reason, Bill knew him, and he kind of took a liking to me and what I was doing. So he was very helpful. And another early supporter, very early on, was a guy named Arthur Spivak. May he rest in peace. Was a manager who, Google him, he managed a whole ton of huge bands. But same thing, I met him. He was a nice guy. He's like, if you need some help in the business, I'll help you out. So there was a few mentors there that helped. But for the most part, I was just doing it all by myself and making every mistake possible. But the only thing that I did that I think was smart back then was I would just learn from the mistakes. Like, if I made a mistake, I go, okay, I screwed this up. Let's just not do that again. How can I not make that same mistake a second time? And I think that's helped over all these years, because I'm not afraid to admit, we make mistakes all the time, but the key is to not repeat those mistakes as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, on the first
but I was learning on the fly, basically. So
yeah, and you're right. You got to learn from your mistakes, or if you're smart, you learn from your mistakes and try not to make them again. On the first Metal Massacre record, the one that famously features Metallica, the band's name is famously misspelled.
Oh, not just the band's name. I mean, the band's name is misspelled. Ron McGovney name is misspelled. Lloyd Grant's name is misspelled. So here's why. So we go old school here. And for any of you people out there that aren't old enough to know what a typesetter is, go Google it. But back then, basically, you'd give all the information to somebody who would do typesetting, and that would be how the stuff would look on a record. And I had all the credits and everything for everything else really early, so I was able to kind of go through and proofread it and give it to the typesetter, so it was clear and she could see it. Well, the Metallica song, we had a deadline of 5 o'clock, whatever the day it was, February something or other in '82, and we told Lars, like, if you have to have it here to the studio where we're mastering it by 3 o'clock or whatever it was. So, it's like 2:30 and he's not there yet. So we're almost like, there. And we were like, if he didn't make it, he's not going to make it on the record. So he showed up at the last minute, first of all, with a cassette tape. And we needed it on a reel-to-reel tape. So we had to bump it up $50. Nobody had $50. Thankfully, John Cornarins, my friend who was helping me with all this stuff, had $50. Otherwise, they might not have been on that record. But he gave me a paper with all the information on it that he had written out, not so clearly. And I didn't really have time because we literally had to drive that straight to the typesetter right afterwards. It was basically being done at that time. So I guess when she saw everything, it wasn't printed very well, number one. Number two, Metallica is not a word. So I guess she felt that there should be 2 T's in there because maybe that's how the English works for her. I don't know. And then he had misspelled the other stuff just because, McGovney, the looked like a U. And I don't know how she screwed up Lloyd, but yeah, I got the album. I was like, this is so great. I put out a record. I can't believe it. And I turned it around. I'm like, oh my God, this is a nightmare.
Well, it's also the last song on the record.
Yeah, I think they had. It's for 2 reasons. Number one, because when we were mastering it, we kind of had to make it the last song because it came in so late. Yeah. But I think that Lars wanted it. I believe he said, "I want this to be the last song on the record." So I was like, all right. I mean, I hadn't heard anything up until then, by the way. I hadn't heard anything. Didn't know what it was going to sound like. Didn't know anything. He's just my friend and said, if I put together a band, could I be on your record? I'm like, sure. So that's how Metallica started, obviously. And I wasn't sure what it sounded like because even that day when we had to bump it up, I had to leave again to go to the typesetter. So I never even heard that track until the record was done.
Wow.
And so
remind us all where this was recorded. Do you recall where Lars and
so they used something called a Fostex, which is this little probably this big device with a cassette, like 4 tracks.
Yeah.
I think they recorded in Lars' bedroom, probably a garage or something like that.
Wow. So just to be clear, Metallica basically doesn't exist at this point. Lars shows up with a tape of a band of guys that he put together specifically to submit a track to your record. Yeah, so the story goes that Lars was trying to get in a band and wasn't having any success, and he had jammed with James a couple of times because James had a band called Leather Charm, but they didn't really think Lars was very good because honestly, he wasn't very good at the time. He was still learning. But Lars went back to him and said, "Hey, I have an opportunity to be on a record," which in 1980, it was late '81, the record came out in '82. That was a huge thing. Like being on a record was, it just doesn't happen back then. Right. So James was like, "Oh, we can be on a record? Then yeah, for sure, let's do it." And they're very nice and kind to me, and always mention that story that Metallica might not have ever existed if it wasn't for that. So whatever. I mean, it's nice that they say that. I would like to hope that they would have done something, but I'm happy to play my little role in it. I think that's one of the cool things about your story is that you were, not only instrumental in helping these bands get started, but all these years later, you're personal friends with them. This wasn't some sort of one-time business transaction and then they got famous and forgot you. You're still friendly with these guys. And I think that speaks volumes about their character and probably also speaks to a degree to the metal community at large. There's a certain loyalty when you do something, they tend not to forget it. But I mean, we're talking about the biggest band ever when in the case of Metallica. And I think it's really cool that they've never forgotten you. They still consider you a friend. They still give you your credit where credit is due. And then, you know, in the same breath, I'm going to add that Kerry King wrote the foreword to your latest book, Swing of the Blade. Again, that goes to show this certain loyalty, this appreciation that's never died. I think that's a remarkable part of your story.
Yeah, Laurence wrote the foreword to the first book, which was cool. So yeah, Carrie's funny because Carrie's like one of my really good friends, and you know, we have radio tickets together, and I just saw him about a week ago. He was here in Vegas, so such a good dude. But you know, I always feel odd asking people, like even with Lars, I don't think I asked him. I think I went to Q Prime and said, "Hey, do you think Lars could do that?" I don't want to ask him directly. Same thing with Carrie. Like I didn't want to ask because he's not that kind of guy that does that sort of stuff, right? So I went to management and said, "Hey, can you ask Curry who wants to do this?" And he said, "Sure." Obviously, he's such a good guy. He's really, he's also, you know, he's got the image out there, you know, Mr. You know, mean and all this stuff. He's like the sweetest guy ever. And he said he did the forward and he sent it to me, you know, texted it to me and said, "What do you think?" I go, "Dude, this is amazing." They're like, "Really? Are you sure?" I go, "It's phenomenal. Thank you so much." So
Yeah, he kind of admitted that it kind of was like not uncomfortable, but it's not, you know, in the forward, he's even being honest, saying, you know, I don't even, where do I start? How do I do this kind of a vibe, which makes it authentic.
Yeah, he's not that kind of guy. But I was kind of thinking, you know, when I'm doing this book, it's like, well, first of all, you know, because I know other people could do us. You know, I'm good friends with Chris Jericho. I mean, I'm trying to get him to do it, but I kind of want to keep it in the Metal Blade family. And I threw out some other names, and I just like, it'd be really cool, you know. I mean, Lars did the first one, so you're gonna follow it up with, you know, somebody halfway decent. So I figured, you know, if Kerry would be perfect because you know, obviously we have the relationship with Slayer in the early days, and he's still a very good friend of mine. So luckily he did it. But it's funny. I asked him when I was with him the other day. I said, "I got to do the audio book. Do you want to read your part?" He's like, "Nah, I'm not doing that." I go, "Okay, I'll get John Bush to do it. He did a bunch of the first books, so he's like that guy." He's like, "Yeah, he's perfect. He's got a good voice." So.
Yeah. Bush nice. Is awesome.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I first of all, with like bands like Slayer, Metallica, these early bands, you know, we're all just fans from that time frame, and you know, I'm happy that, you know, I'm friends with, you know, not only just bands that were on Metal Blade, but you know, the Anthrax guys are really good friends of mine. You know, so many bands are, and it's because we're all metal fans, and we're all in this community together. And you know, 99% of all of everybody's they're really great people, and we're all, you know, we share that love of metal, and especially a lot of guys that came up. You know, it's funny because there's these different dynamics. You know, a lot of friends came up at the same time I did, so we're the same age, so we're the same, you know, bands we discovered early on and whatnot. But then you have the other guys, like for example, Johan, the singer from Amon Amarth, as I'm wearing a shirt today, is also a very close friend of mine as well. And you know, he's about 10 years younger than I am, and so it's just interesting to hear his trajectory and, you know, what got him into metal and what were the gateways. Because, you know, a lot of these guys had, like, when I was there, what wasn't really a gateway necessarily. It was just, you know,
right,
Sabbath, the classic stuff. But for, you know, guys that are a little bit younger, there's the gateway bands they first heard that got them down there. So it's really interesting. Just to wrap up real quick, it's you know, I like to work with people that I get along with. I don't want to work with people that are a headache or have, you know, drug problems or, you know, any sort of problems. So we've been pretty lucky over the years. We haven't dealt with too many of those issues. And, you know, I'm happy to say, you know, almost every band on the label are all good friends of mine that you know, I have enough contact with. So which is great.
I think too, there's another shared camaraderie among you and the bands that you signed, and that is a lot of the music that you brought to the world for the first time was in many ways very unprecedented. We didn't hear bands like Metallica or Slayer in the early 80s when this stuff. I remember thinking that it just couldn't get heavier than Iron Maiden, you know. And then so there's this brotherhood among you all, that you started something and it took over the world. You stuck it to the man and you did it on your own terms out of a basement somewhere. And look at us now. And I think if you share that experience with somebody, you don't forget it.
100%. And, you know, all of us, you know, people we always get asked the question, do you ever think that any of this would be as big as it is? And back in the early days, no way. There's no way. I mean, none of us thought any of this would ever be as big as this whole thing has got. We were just fans of the music, and we were just doing whatever we could to, try to promote or play or whatever the music that we loved. We didn't really think about making money or think about selling a lot of records. We're just trying to make enough money to try to survive, which, was not easy for a lot of us. But we did it because we loved it. And then, the fact that it has become successful, and I think it took a while, you talk about Metallica and even Slayer. It's like, it took a while for those bands to get really big. So it wasn't like they were, all of a sudden thrust into the spotlight, which, some other bands have, and they may have, fame may have changed them, where these guys took a while for them to get to that point. I think that, like, if Metallica would have had that crazy, it would have been massive right away, and maybe it would have been a little bit of a different story, but it took them a while, so they appreciate it.
I think that there's a story here. I'm in a club in Los Angeles. It's like 1989, and I'm in the restroom, and Lars walks in, and he's in the stall. He's in the urinal right next to me, not to be gross or anything. And I'm like, dude. He's like, dude. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm out here working the Dangerous Toys record. He goes, wow. Oh yeah. Wow. And it's like, yeah. He said something to me. He's like, that happened too fast. So just to make the story real short, it was like, you may know my history. Dave knows my history. I'm in Watchtower. And then a minute later, I'm making a record in LA with Max Norman, and Lars is going, damn, that's too fast. So what you're talking about, this like sort of like gradual fan building, it's kind of like the tape trading, and kind of like, I've got to get, I heard this one song. I heard, Riding with the Angels, Samson, on this mix tape that my buddy in ninth grade gave me yesterday, and I have to find the record. It starts that kind of thing. Well, that's a trajectory. That's a momentum that has yet to even be realized. And so I feel like what you're saying is straight up the true way to just have your successes be worthy, and not, you don't have a party the day that your demo comes out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not about that.
Just to toot your horn a bit, I was going to mention it earlier, but since you brought it up, that, Watchtower, which is, still one of the greatest bands from that era. And Watchtower was, I think, probably universally the most loved demo when the first Watchtower came out. Like, I was getting bombarded with people just going, "Oh my God, if you heard this, if you heard this, if you heard this." I mean, he said to me, like, "Oh, yeah, this is incredible." So, yeah.
Crazy music from crazy kids still in high school. So
and so early on too, like what you guys were doing was super progressive, obviously, and it was, same thing, so ahead of what, so ahead of your time, really, what you guys were doing.
Yeah. I feel like the bands like Voivod and there's a slew of other bands that had their own. I mean, what the fuck is what the fuck is Watchtower? What the fuck is happening right now goes back to the crossover thing. But you could say the same thing about Johnny Law. It was like too soon for people to, well, where do I see a bunch of geometric cutouts on the wall. Where the fuck do I put this? So that can be part of your business trajectory either. And I don't mean to just kind of jump around. I want to know, at what point did you ever recoup on this? I know it wasn't the plan. I'm holding up First Metal Massacre, which is people don't realize that it's your fanzine.
Yeah.
That's really putting this out.
I wasn't starting a record company. I'm just putting out an album of bands that I wanted to help out. So that's what the fanzine thing is on there. And I have no idea. So again, talking about making mistakes, I made every conceivable mistake on that first record. First of all, I only had enough money. I was able to I had a little bit of money. My aunt gave me a little bit of money. John Carnarens gave me a little bit of money. Said enough money to barely manufacture 2,500 copies of that first album. Which
back then, that's a lot. That's a lot for back then.
I mean, but it sold out in like a week or 2 weeks.
Holy shit!
So these distributors call me saying we need more. I go, first of all, you haven't paid me yet, and second of all, I don't have any money. So I didn't know what to do. So Gem Records, which was one of the largest independent distributors at the time, came to me and said, well, why don't you license us the record? We'll manufacture and get it out for you. I said, okay, no problem. So I did that, and they completely screwed it up. They changed the cover. That's the one that's just silver with the Metal Massacre thing on it. And I have no idea how much that sold. I never got one accounting. They went bankrupt, and we tried to get some answers, but we never did. So then we got the rights back eventually, and put it out in its proper form. So that would be the third version of that. And that we sold, I think, roughly 25,000 copies between vinyl, and we also did it on a cassette at the time. And we had the rights for 5 years, basically. And then after 5 years, we lost the rights, and we just kind of moved on. So I think it was, between the stuff that we did is about 27,000 maybe that we did over the 5 years. Again, I have no idea what Gem sold, and then that was really it. And then we just recently, I wanted to do this for years, but I thought it was going to be a nightmare from hell. I wanted to reissue it. And I don't know who owns the rights to everything. We don't have any rights. So, but I thought it was going to be just a gigantic pain in the ass, and it was. I didn't want to do it for a long time, but I thought, well, for our 40th anniversary, I really would love to do this and reissue it because people ask all the time. So I sat down for an afternoon. I got everybody's contacts, and I either emailed or Facebook messaged or whatever. All the guys from the different bands. I knew Bitch would do it. I knew Stuart would do it. I knew Metallica would do it because they're all good friends of mine. And Metallica has been nothing but spectacular to us over all these years, and continues to be. But I wasn't sure about Ratt or Black and Blue or Malice. I didn't know who owns the rights to stuff. But I just reached out to all the guys I knew, and within 2 hours, everybody said yes, we're in, and it was like one of the easier things I ever did. And we wanted to keep it rare, so we only did 5,000 copies of it on vinyl. And then Metallica came in and said, well, could we do a different variant, a different color? Like do 2,000 just to the Met Club? And I was like, of course. So we had to go ask everybody else. And everybody said, sure. So that was really fun. So the cool thing too about that, and this will answer some of your questions, we've done a documentary actually about that first Metal Massacre album, which I didn't know about. The staff decided to do something just to surprise me, I guess, a little bit. We just thought it was going to be like a 20, 30-minute little documentary, but we got every band is on there. Every band on the record is on there. And they've got me. It's turned into this like hour and 20-minute long documentary, which we're figuring out where we're going to place it. So, but it came out really, really cool. And it was really just incredibly nice of all these guys to do it. I've rekindled after, I hadn't talked to Stephen Pearcy for 25 years or something. And so rekindled a friendship with him, and he's been really great. He lives here in the Vegas area. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Ratt because they also appeared on the first Metal Massacre record. So much like the case with Metallica, you can be credited with the first commercial recording of Ratt. And they obviously went on to big things too, but in sort of a different genre. But I think it speaks to a point you were making earlier, that when you were putting this out, you weren't necessarily all completely focused on it's got to be metal, it's got to be thrash. You were looking for things that you enjoyed, or just things that you like listening to. I think Bitch is on the record, and they're also sort of maybe a little more in the same vein as Ratt, in the sense that they're not thrashy necessarily. But I wanted to talk about Ratt. Tell me your impressions of Ratt, how you found them, how you discovered them, and how they ended up on the record.
Good question.
Yeah, so and Motley Crue, by the way, is supposed to be on the album as well. But because I did a ton of work with them, I wrote the first article ever with Sylvie Simmons for Sounds Magazine in the UK. They did a big 2-page spread on them, which ignited this firestorm in the UK because they're like, "What is this band?" And then their managers came to me and said, hey, we have 900 Motley Crue records we made. What do we do with them? I said, we'll take them to this distributor, Green World, and they'll help you. If I knew then what I knew now, right? So Ratt was a similar thing. So when I was working at the record store, I had no idea that there was any sort of scene in Los Angeles. I just figured it was all about what was going on in Europe. And one of the guys who used to come in a lot and buy records I became friendly with said, well, there's metal bands here in LA. And I said, there are? He goes, yeah. So the first show I saw was at the Troubadour in LA on a Wednesday night for $1, Motley Crue and Ratt. I was like, wow. And they're both a lot heavier at that point, but they were both great. So that was the first time I saw Ratt, obviously, and just thought they were great. I think Jackie Lee was in the band at that point, and they were a little heavier. They're a little more Van Halen-ish, I guess. I mean, I'm sorry, Judas Priest-ish, actually.
Okay.
But we were playing Flying D's and stuff. So I just became friendly with them. I get more friendly with Robin. There's a scene in those early days where we'd all go hang out at the Troubadour and see the other bands, and we'd end up. Betsy's mom's house was about 10 minutes from the Strip in Hollywood, and we'd all usually end up after the gigs over there hanging out. And, Robin was one of the guys that would hang out with us a lot. So became really friendly with him, and what a sweetheart of a guy too. And, Ratt they were kind of around. They hadn't really gotten their audience quite yet, because they changed a lot of members and they, kind of switching around. I remember I was talking to Robin once, and he's like, we just can't find an audience. I don't well, what do we do? Because they were literally opening for Bitch a lot. And I go, you guys will be fine. Your guys are really good. You'll be fine. You'll get there. And then, I think both he and Steven kind of saw the Motley trajectory and were like, oh, okay, that's probably a good way to go. And they kind of followed in their footsteps a little bit. And it was the same thing. They had an EP that they did after we did the track. They had a demo
on Time Coast. Is that the name?
Yeah, it's on their own label, basically.
Yeah, Time Coast, and I think Bo Hill. Did Bo Hill do it?
Did he do the EP? He might have. I think so. I have to go look that up.
I wore that thing out, man.
Oh, so good. I was on. Steven was on Eddie Trunk's radio show the other day, and Eddie's doing a lot of his shows from here in Vegas. So I barged in and talked for a little bit with Steven and stuff.
Cool.
It was pretty fun. But they, but I really liked the band. And look, in all honesty, I needed bands for the record. That's why there's 2 Malice tracks on there, because Motley was originally going to be on there, and then they fell off because they were already becoming something. They didn't really need to be on there, so it made sense. So Malice had a bunch of good songs. They we'll just put an extra Malice song on there. But yeah, Ratt was always really good, and I was, obviously, LA was such an interesting time back then, because we're all kind of in the same scene, and there was not only about Bitch and Savage Grace and Steeler and all these bands in LA, Omen, and then Armored Saint, and but it was interesting because there was and obviously Metallica and Slayer as well. All the heavy side was one side, and then the kind of the other side with Motley and Ratt and all of those kind of bands. I guess throw Wasp in there maybe. But it was a really incredible time in LA, because you had these 2 separate scenes that were happening, and it was just, it was super exciting. Just for me, I was lucky to be, really lucky to be in the right place at the right time in LA in the early 80s.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, we had DJ Will on the podcast a while back, and I asked him this question. Of course, DJ Will was an employee of Metal Blade Records for a number of years, which is why I asked the question at the time, and I wanted to ask you. I asked him what bands were basically near misses. Like, you were this close, they had your attention, you were thinking about signing them, you didn't, and you wish you had. And earlier you mentioned Watchtower, a demo circulating that everybody was raving about. DJ Will mentioned Watchtower. He also mentioned Pantera. So from your perspective, what were a couple bands that came on your radar that you couldn't sign for some reason, but you really wish you could have?
Yeah, well, Pantera being one of them, and that was just like, these things are always just a money issue. I mean, they get at the same thing. We were kind of in the ball game with them early on, but we didn't have enough money at the time either, so they signed with Combat. But there's some interesting ones, like, for example, Metal Church. Like, I was friends with Kurt Vanderhoof from Metal Church for a long time. In fact, they were also almost going to be on the first Metal Massacre album as well. We eventually got them on Metal Massacre 5, but what I explained to everybody back then was, why didn't you sign Anthrax? Why didn't you sign, Metal Church? Well, no faxes, no internet, no nothing in the early 80s, right? And a phone call, like an hour-long phone call from Los Angeles to Seattle might be $100, and from New York to LA might be $100. Like, it was not cheap. So if you were signing a band from some other place, like you had to, call them at night and, do these different things because it was just really hard to do. So, Metal Church would have been one band I always loved, and it would have been great on the label. Probably the biggest one was Guns N' Roses. So they were playing around LA, and I was friends with their manager. I was good friends with the guy who engineered their demo, all this stuff. And they kept saying, "Oh, come on, you got to come see them. You got to come see them. They're great. They're great." And I had other friends who were telling me the same thing. No, I don't. I was never a fan of glam. Don't like that whole scene. I don't. I'm not gonna go. You can ask me 100 times. I'm not gonna go. So I never went. I mean, not that we put out that maybe we could have put out the Uzi Suicide EP thing that they put out before Appetite, but I never even listened to that. So Appetite comes out. I was in our New York office, and I get a cassette, the advanced cassette, and I put it in the tape recorder. I press play, and I go, "Oh my God! Well, this is incredible." So we actually ended up doing a lot of marketing promotion for them. We did stuff for Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, Soundgarden, Fade No More. Like we did all the underground marketing, all of the college radio, and underground fans and stuff. We did all the marketing because the labels had no idea what to do about any of that stuff. So we did it. So I remember the first time I met Slash, I can't remember if I told the story in one of the books or not, but it was at an Iron Maiden Seventh Son of a Seventh Son listening party in Hollywood. I'd never met him before, and somebody said, "Hey, Slash is around here." I go, "Oh, I'd love to say hi." And he started talking. He came over, started talking, and we started drinking. So towards the end of the evening, we both had quite a few Jack and Cokes or shots of Jack or whatever it was at the time. And he finally goes, "He's like, how come you never came to see us?" And I go, "I thought you guys were a glam band, and I wasn't into it." He's like, "I hate that people thought that." And I go, "Yeah, me too." So not again, who knows?
I can relate.
Yeah,
that's interesting because you kind of you did take a liking to Ratt, and there's people could argue that obviously they became very glammy. I don't know what they were looking like.
It was the Ratt of the early, and the Motley too of the early '80s was not nearly where. In fact, the first time I saw Molly with their hair all freaked out was on the back of Too Fast for Love. I was like, I've never seen that before.
Right.
Interesting. They were kind of both bands were pretty heavy, and they just went in that direction. And then Poison, who I don't like at all. Sorry.
That's fair.
Up the ante for that scene. It's not my scene.
But that's kind of my point. It's like Ratt and Motley were kind of dirtier and a little more street at that point. And if ever there was a band that was dirty and street, it was Guns N' Roses, not glam, not
yeah. But again, I had no idea. I just saw the flyers, and the flyers they were all kind of glammed out. I think they were just doing it because that was the scene in Hollywood at that time. They're all glammed out. I'd have no interest.
I feel like that happens a lot where you're in a band and there's trends that in your psyche you end up following, so you have this what others will perceive a cool flyer or some kind of I don't know. I mean, we sound the way we sound. What are we going to do to stand out? Oh, I guess we'll just look like. They don't realize whether they look like something that they don't sound like. I mean, a prime example is the Cinderella record. In my opinion, that first Cinderella, there's songs on there that are fucking dark. The title track, it's like this weird Alice in Chains, fucking Sabbath vibe going on. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? I'm re-looking at the front cover and going, what the fuck? It doesn't, the name of the band is wrong. So I see.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. Like I was not in any of that hair metal stuff at all, but I love Cinderella. Cinderella to me wasn't a hair metal band. I mean, it had the image, but they were an Aerosmith kind of R&B dirty band. I saw them a bunch live. They were great. I'm actually really good friends with Fred Corey to this day. He's like one of the nicest people on the planet as well. And for some reason, a whole bunch of guys in Tom Kiefer's band follow me on social media, which is interesting. But yeah, in fact, to speak of that, Ricky Rackman, I'm sure everybody knows who Ricky was. Headbangers Ball forever. So I follow him on all his social media things, and he's out on the road doing his.
He'll be in Austin. He'll be in Austin tomorrow.
Oh, cool, awesome! Yeah, he said he was playing Vegas, but then I saw the dates and he's not. So I'm kind of bummed because I really want to see his thing. I've seen some clips and it's just him telling stories. But anyway, he was in New Orleans and told this great story about it. He was in New Orleans for a Cinderella release party at some point.
Yeah.
And he was with Kiefer and a couple of other guys, and they went to some, like, if you've been to New Orleans, they have these amazing blues bars there, where just these phenomenal players out of nowhere, just incredible. So they went into this one blues bar, and Kiefer got up and sang the blues with a bunch of these guys, and Ricky said it was unbelievable. Like, he was singing the blues, sounding amazing. I mean, he's a phenomenal singer to this day.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were lumped into that whole thing with those bands. I always thought they were way more like Aerosmith than they were that whole hair metal stuff. So you're completely right about that.
They were from the wrong side of the street. They got up on the wrong side of the bed and wrote those songs, and like, yes, stay, whatever it is you're doing, stay there. And I think they pulled it off. The wrong band name, I don't know who decided that was a good idea.
Yeah.
I just saw Kiefer here in Austin last weekend, and he was amazing. Just incredible. It was kind of a reminder to me. I always knew he was a great talent, but I haven't seen him live. Well, I saw him live the year before, but this time I was right up close, and it was one of those things where you rarely see a guy do this. Like, he started a song on the piano and then stood up, and then in time for the guitar solo, a tech comes out and straps a guitar on him. He rips off the solo, just wails it, puts the guitar back. Then he becomes just a front man. I mean, in the course of one song. And
he did that in Cinderella too.
Yeah, this happened all night long. He'd start off just singing the vocals, and then someone would bring him a guitar, or he'd start off with the guitar and get rid of the guitar. And, it was phenomenal. And his voice sounded amazing. And this was just last week, so he's still incredible.
It's a little bit different when you see that right this close.
Yeah.
Because the first time I saw, it was actually Cinderella. And then a year later, it was on the Monsters of Rock cruises. Saw Cinderella, kind of a reunion vibe, and then a year or two later, I was on the cruise again, and I saw just Tom Kiefer's version of it, and I saw that, and I had never seen it before. So this was in this decade. So you're kind of like, well, that changes everything, because it's not just hearing the record and wow, this is great, and then like, what's for dinner? It's kind of like, holy shit. So it kind of seals the deal as to, and it also once again goes back to the crossover thing to me, that it's not glam, but it has that element because it's rock and roll. It's really dirty. It's kind of sounds like it's from the 70s, but it's completely viable material for radio play right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's pretty weird.
Yeah, it's timeless. That's the word, I think. It worked in 85 and 86, and it works to this day. And that's just a mark of great musicianship and great songwriting.
Yeah.
Brian, I was going to ask you, I keep calling it an empire because I don't think there's a more suitable word for what you've done with Metal Blade Records. I have to ask, with all your success, what's the biggest offer you've been given by a major label to buy you out?
Oh yeah, stupid money, but I have no interest in it. Money's not my motivating factor at all. I mean, I have a very comfortable life. I don't need a Ferrari or a mansion in the hills or any of this stuff. I drive a Honda Civic Sport, which is a fairly fine car, and I'm able to have a couple properties, nice properties in Vegas. What am I going to do? Like, I'm going to sell the company? It's two things why I would never do that. Number one. And probably the biggest reason is that if I sell the company, I'm going to have to sign a contract for 3 to 5 years to run it, because they're not going to buy it if I'm not going to run it. So that's number one. So then I got to answer to somebody else. I've never answered to anybody else in my entire life, and I'm not planning on doing that now. So I don't want to. And I have a lot of friends who have sold their labels or their companies, different companies, and they instantly regret it as soon as they've done it, because then all of a sudden they realize, like, oh no, I got to ask some guy in a suit that doesn't know anything. Can I spend $1,000 on this or something? So I wouldn't want to do that, number one, because I don't want to do that. Number two, I wouldn't do that to our employees. We have a phenomenal staff, and it's taken us a long time to get here, but our staff are absolutely incredible. And I know that if I ever signed it, that half of them would be kicked out. They wouldn't have any jobs. And the same thing for the bands. We've cultivated this, for lack of a better word, family between everybody. And some bands might work out okay with that, but some bands weren't. I've seen it happen with all the other labels that have sold it, and I wouldn't want to do that for that. And I also kind of want to have, more of a lasting legacy for the name Metal Blade, because who knows if I sold it to Sony or, some mega, company or whatever, that they, might eventually just phase out the name down the road. I don't want to do that. So we have a succession plan, and we have all these different things going on to try to keep it as independent as humanly possible for as long as humanly possible. So yeah, but there's some numbers out there that even, we've only done it once or twice where we kind of went down the road of, doing an actual valuation and having all that sort of nonsense there. But yeah, people have thrown out really just dumb money, but I have no interest.
Wow. I love you even more.
Interesting, man. It's so great. It's so
That's
great.
amazing. I heard.
Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
I heard you mention earlier that you and Kerry King have Raiders tickets, and there's another thing we have in common. I'm also a Raiders fan, although we haven't had much to cheer about in decades. But
full disclosure, technically not a Raiders fan. So
okay, you're just tagging along with.
I grew up a Broncos fan. But I don't hate. I never hated the Raiders. I hate the Chargers and the Chiefs, but I never hated the Raiders, and because I have so many friends who are a big fan. Hetfield's a big fan, and Kerry's always been a big fan. So the colors are great. But Kerry started taking me to games years ago, and he's friends with Fred Molitnikoff and all these big executives for the Raiders. And a bunch of them are all massive metalheads, like huge metalheads. So I kind of became friendly with a bunch of guys who worked for the Raiders. And then when they came here to Vegas, Kerry's like, we got to get tickets. My guys are going to get us really great tickets. I'm like, all right. So we have really great tickets. They weren't cheap. They definitely weren't cheap.
I bet.
On the 20-yard line, on the 50-yard line, about 20 rows up, and we have all private clubs and stuff. So it's a blast. And I mean, he's a diehard Raider fan. I feel bad for him sometimes when the Raiders lose games, because if they win, he's in a really good mood. If they lose, not as much.
Yeah. Bolitnikoff is one of my all-time favorite players, so I'm a little envious there.
One of the nicest people, him and his wife. I went to maybe 2 or 3 games in their suite when they're still in Oakland. And my gosh, just such wonderful, down-to-earth, really super nice people. Very impressive.
That's
you guys, you talk about sports. You're kind of in and out in your latest book about sports and how big of a fan you are. But what's interesting to me, even more so, is the fact that most of the people that you're talking about in there, when you find out they're a metalhead, it just seems to make life easier for you when you're just, going to a game or, getting tickets or writing. Also, you're friends with people who, I'm going to get their names wrong, so I'm not even going to try, but people who write sports articles and things, and you're talking about just that whole, there's a culture there that you're part of, because first off, you're a fan of that, but then when you find out they're metalheads, this other part of you raises up on top, and then they're like, what? Do you feel like, the idea that someone flying, whether they're wearing a Wasp t-shirt or a Slayer t-shirt or whatever, once you don't know because they're wearing a sports jacket or whatever, and then you find out that they have the same record collection as you.
Yep.
They're in your tribe, like boom, it's like magnets, boom. But that magnet, there's no connection until. It's interesting how all walls fall.
Yep. Well, one thing I've learned, and it kind of started with sports, because I'm a huge sports fan, especially hockey. And, I did a podcast for a few years with Sean Rourke, who one of the guys that's the senior editor of NHL.com. So we did this podcast. He came to me with the idea, you want to do a podcast and we'll talk to hockey players, athletes, celebrities about who are metalheads. I'm like, all right, sounds interesting, but hockey players especially have, their interviews are extremely boring. They have no personality. How are we going to talk for 45 minutes with these guys when, it's hard to get 5 minutes out of them when you're watching these interviews, and they even then they're boring. But once you talk to these guys and they're not talking about hockey and they're talking about what they really like and music, half the time we'd have to stop at an hour. We had guys on multiple times who ended up going into media and stuff, which was really fun. And the other thing I've learned is that no matter what it is, no matter what walk of life it is, whether it's a sports team or sports league or a bank or, you name the industry, there are metalheads in that industry. I mean, it's countless people who are like, super high up executives at like banks, for example, or super high up executives in the, in the spirits world. There's all these different people that are massive metalheads that you just, for me, I don't know. I'm just putting this music out, and I'm trying to turn it on to different people. You don't really think like who's a big music fan, and then I meet Mike Piazza from the Dodgers when he was playing for the Dodgers, and I become really good friends with him. And Chris Jericho, the wrestling guy, him and I are really close friends. Well, I don't know anything about wrestling. I don't like wrestling. I think I watched one of his matches. I'm like, who is that guy? But we're both metal nerds, so we'll constantly text each other, like talking about Iron Maiden. I've done his podcast a bunch, talking about music and stuff too. So it's really crazy, but I love it when my worlds collide, especially with hockey, because I've become really ingrained in that world. I have so many friends that are, both players and also executives and, guys who cover the sport. So I get all the inside information. So, when the Stanley Cup finals were here in Vegas, it was great because I was able to hang out with all these guys and get all the inside information and everything. So it's fun for me. And when I was talking to these guys, and they're like high up guys on TV and all the sports media stuff. And I go, can't believe you guys, let me hang out with you guys. Like, no, you're doctored in, or you're on our fold now. You're all right. So I'm like, oh, okay, because I do know a lot about hockey. So that's I might know more about hockey than I do metal, maybe.
Wow,
Oh, yeah.
That's saying a lot. So I got to ask you, do you think Slayer's really done?
Yes. They're done. People ask me that all the time. So one thing I'll say about Carrie is a man of his word. And, he's a very stubborn guy. And, he said there's not going to be Slayer ever again. When he did the amazing chain drop at the end of the last show, that's it. I mean, you can't ever say ever, never, right? But I would be utterly shocked to my bone if Slayer ever played another show. I just don't think it's going to happen.
He mentions it in the foreword. He says of the new book, he says, even though my band is long gone or something like that.
Yep.
And then he mentioned it like it's like a snip, and then he's off.
I mean, look, what's the reason? What's the main reason why all these bands are still playing? All these older bands still playing. They need the money. Wives, kids, divorces, all this sort of stuff, and they've just gone through their money. Like, I mean, some bands, I get it. Like Metallica, they don't need to play another show. They have money for 100 lifetimes.
They could have broken up 15, 20 years ago.
Right. But the thing about that is, and the same thing with athletes. Like if you see athletes when they're, they have to retire at a certain point, right? Just because the body gives up. So they're 39 years old. That's why you see these guys give these press conferences. They're crying because they know they're never going to have the experience of running out in front of 20, 40, 50,000 people and being able to entertain them, play a sport. Well, if you're a musician, you crave that. It's almost like, like a drug. Like, I mean, imagine, being Metallica and you're walking in front of 60,000 people and you have them in the palm of your hands. I mean, the adrenaline rush just has to be, I've talked to those guys about it. It's out of control. So they do it because they love doing it. And it's, that adulation is insane. So some bands will do it for that, but the majority of them do it for the fact that they need the cash. And Carrie made plenty of money. He was very smart with his money. I don't think he could ever run out. I mean, maybe he could, but I don't think he will.
He's super intelligent. Seems super intelligent to me.
He's very, very smart.
Oh,
but he's doing his own thing now, which I think is going to be really good. And I think people are going to be surprised at how good it is. And it'll do well. I mean, is it going to become as big as Slayer? I mean, maybe in a few years it might be, but I don't think he really cares at this point. I think he wants to make really good music. I'm sure it's going to sound very similar to what Slayer was because that's what he does. But yeah, so many of these bands are, they're even some of the tours happening now, like Elton John and Deep Purple, and some of these artists are saying it's the last Kiss, Aerosmith, it's the last ever tour. So it doesn't mean they're not going to play more gigs. It's the last ever tour.
Right.
So, which is fine. I get it. I'm hoping that, when Kiss is done, they'll come do a residency here in Vegas. So,
Yeah.
see.
Sure.
But yeah, with Slayer, I'm pretty sure that's just not. I would, like I said, I would be really, really shocked because Carrie. I won't tell stories, but I know of things that I tried to get Carrie to do that I thought would be pretty cool. But once he has his mind set on something, that it's not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhat similar question. As a guy who was the first to bring Metallica to us by way of your Metal Massacre compilation, what's your opinion on their latest album, 72 Seasons?
So first of all, Greg Fiddleman, who used to play this band called Rhino Bucket that I absolutely love back in
Huge
the
fan. Huge
early
fan.
90s. Yeah.
Yeah, I have stories I can tell you, but another time.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. Anyway, he produced, so the sonically, I think the last two records have been the best two sounding records they probably ever made. I like Hardwired a little bit more because I like the songs, but my problem with this record is I do really love it. I think that about I guess 70% of it is really, really great. There's a few songs that I like parts of it, but not the whole thing. But I don't like the sequence. To me, I would have sequenced that record a lot differently. And that's how I listen to it in my sequence. And then I go, I really like it.
Wow.
But yeah, the sequence is a lot, but it's still really good. I mean, I think for a band that's at this point in their career, it kind of started with Hardwired, where they kind of went back to their roots a little bit and made a super heavy album. I mean, they're still making pretty heavy records. And the one song that I wasn't sure that I was going to like at first, and it kind of has really grown on me, is the 11-minute song. What is it, Emirata or whatever it's called?
Mm-hmm.
That song's really good. It creeps in my head now a lot. So,
Wow.
but it's good. I like it. Like I said, there's probably 3, maybe 4 songs that are okay, but the rest of it's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think of Lux Eterna? What do you think of the first single? Yeah.
It's old school. It's an old school song. A very, very early, very new wave, very new wave of British heavy metal related. And the little ode to Motorhead at the end with the double kick drum from Ace of Spades. It's great. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. The vocal. I'm still, after many, many, many years, I'm still getting used to James becoming this badass singer.
Right.
He has become this monster vocalist. I mean, he could front Leonard Skinner. He could front. He's a fucking great, like, not a rock and roll. He could sing anything at this point. I really feel strongly about that. So
I agree.
The work ethic on just Metallica, not James particular, the band working so hard to make the record they feel like they need to make at this point in their careers, to use your word. So
yeah, and they're an interesting animal because I have to. Well, first of all, you're right about James. That one of my least favorite Metallica records was very controversial. Is "Kill 'Em All," because it's great, but James didn't know how to sing yet. So I think he'd be the first to admit that. But now he sounds amazing. But they're interesting because I go, people ask me all the time. Like we were talking about just the other day, like somebody said I really like Saint Anger. I go, I like Saint Anger a lot too. It's drum. The snare sound is a little unusual, but I like it. But even when you go to like Load and Reload, a lot of people don't like those records. Like you got to remember where those guys' heads were at when they're making those records, and they're all about what their influences are at the time. Obviously, the first 4 records, they're all new wave heavy metal, all that sort of stuff. So those records sounded like that, and then the Black Album was kind of more. They started creeping in with more of the Thin Lizzy and Rainbow, and the '70s sort of stuff they liked, and that was really what Load and Reload became, because you put in more like some Boyster Cult in there, and some definitely more Thin Lizzy, and even some like Bob Seger, and some of the stuff that they covered on the record before that kind of was in there. And that was just their influence. And same thing, you look at Saint Anger, they were super into System of a Down and all those kind of bands. So that's kind of whatever they're listening to at the time is where the music goes, and they've gotten back to that on really the last 3 records where they kind of went back to it. In fact, prior to Death Magnetic, Lars called me up and said, "Hey, do you have some copies of that new British heavy metal compilation that we did?" I go, "Yeah, can you send me a couple?" Like
I had
James
that on cassette. I had that on cassette. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, so I would go, yeah, because I guess they lost it and they wanted to kind of reconnect with that world, because at that point they hadn't reconnected for a while, and that's I think kind of launched these last three records. They got really back into their early influences. James, wearing tank T-shirts and Which Fine T-shirts. And I remember he was asking me once, like, hey, this is, I guess, the Death Magnetic tour, but he was making a battle vest, a metal. Can you give me some patches? I'm like, sure.
He's got the Holocaust patch.
Yeah.
Always
got all the
fucking
stuff, right?
Holocaust patch on there, man.
So,
half his fans don't know who that is.
I think
half his fans.
Probably 80%.
Yeah.
I think Metallica, of course, is obviously in a very unique position. To Brian's point, they have the luxury of being able to do that. A lot of bands that don't have the legacy that they have, if they took a left turn, the label would go, "What the hell are you doing?" And they'd either be dropped, or the records wouldn't sell, or it would be the end of their career. But Metallica is very unusual in the sense that they're free to do whatever the hell they want. I mean, they came back from Lulu. So,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And
well, not only Lulu, but that crazy movie that they put out that hardly anybody knows about, because I was talking about this the other night about it, because that was the first thing that Greg Fiddleman did. He did the music for that. It was that movie, Through the Never. It's not very good. The live stuff is phenomenal, but the narrative is weird. But Fiddleman did the mixing on it. I remember I went to the premiere in New York, and those guys were there. It sounded so great. I said, I don't know who did the mixing, but he should do your next record. So he's done the next three. So I'm sure I was one of many people that said that they should do that. But
I feel you're a good guy to just kind of seal my question, to answer this question. Do you know for sure if Greg is actually helping them write material? Well,
so what a good producer or engineer does is, I don't know that I don't think he's writing anything. I mean, those guys have the way they've been writing for years is kind of the same way. They do demos of riffs. They give them all to Lars pieces them all together. They're really long because there's a lot of really good riffs. But I think what Greg does, and I've been in the studio with those guys, I think what he does, as any good engineer will do, is they go, well, maybe this part, maybe you want to transition, and just little subtle notes on stuff that they might not have thought about. But I don't think he's writing a riff or a lyric or even a melody line. I don't really think he's involved in that way, because they've kind of been doing that the same way for all these years. I don't think it would change.
Yeah, I think more to kind of doctor my question a little bit. I feel like, because just seeing footage on whatever YouTube or even different places, because some of their, you can watch them in their rehearsal room, and Greg is sitting there, there's just parts going on, and he's got a pad and pencil and a little laptop, and he's going, play that part 4 times, play this one. He's helping arrange or something like that.
Definitely. I mean, Bob Rock was the same way as well. And it just working on arrangements and thinking things that they might not have thought about. Well, maybe that part could go here or could go there. So I think any really good engineer, you want them to be kind of the, however many members of the band, the fifth guy, the fifth band member. Martin Birch was that way with all the great records we did, with Maiden and Rainbow and Deep Purple and everything else. Really good producers will sit there and we'll have, I've produced a bunch of records, and I can't write anything, but I would do the same thing. It's like, hey, that sing this part a little bit differently, or maybe you can end that one part, 1 bar early or something. Just little things like that just subtly, and they may work and they may not work, but I think if you're a good producer engineer, you want to kind of have that autonomy, especially a guy like Greg that he played, so he knows.
Oh yeah,
he knows how it works.
He knows how to write songs. He knows how to write a pop song, a metal song. I'm a big fan of his, and have had some great moments hanging with him. I've ridden in the backseat of his 66 Lincoln Continental color gold with suicide doors. I went to Rhino Bucket rehearsal. This is probably 90. And I stole George's guitar and played all their songs with them at their rehearsal. And they were like, I think you're our biggest fan. Anyway, that's where I was.
I might argue that I might have been, but I'm not a guy that when I go to shows, I usually hang in the back. I'm not really an upfront guy, but Yeah, Rhino Bucket, man. When they would play Kogan at Teaser, I'd be up front, just head banging away.
Awesome. They're still amazing. I love George to death, and we're fairly close. Let's talk about Ghost. Let's talk about, because you're talking about Ghost. You gave them their own chapter about how close you were, and how involved you were in like sort of like being this guy that was about to, and then all of a sudden this, and it seems to be a reoccurring theme for you to be this close and get in good and get on a fucking plane and go to their house, and then the next thing you know, it's like, what? Tell us a little bit about.
That happened. So the Ghost thing is an interesting story because so we were distributing a label called Rise Above for the U.S. and one of the guys in the U.K. worked for us, and it was also the Lee from Cathedral's label. And so they had a bunch of really cool stuff. But they would send me the stuff when they had it, like, hey, here's our next batch of releases, just to send it to you. What do you think? So one of them was Ghost, the first Ghost record. They sent it to me, and I listened to it. I go, oh my God, this is incredible. So I immediately call Will, and I go, dude, this Ghost record is phenomenal. He's like, really? You think so? It's it's a side project for a bunch of guys from like death and black metal bands. I go, no, there's something here. Like, this isn't just like a side project. This record is phenomenal. Like, especially when it came out, like what they were doing, like very old school, Mercyful Fate meets Voice or Cult, kind of very melodic. Always the lyrics are super satanic, and it just had almost like a 70s, 80s feel to it that nobody was really doing at that time. But I just thought it was amazing. So the first thing I do is send it to my friends like James Hetfield and Charlie Benante and, a bunch of these guys. And Selmo got a hold of it, and they all started going crazy. In fact, I sent it to Hetfield because I had a feeling he would like it. He sent me his email, and it was Ghost was on the headline with like literally 100 exclamation points after that. So I told Tobias that, and Metallica is one of his favorite bands. He couldn't believe it. But
I think the quote in the book is like, I won't take a plane over there to hang out with you. I'll just float across the river on this email from James. Yeah,
pretty much.
Fucking great. I fell out of my chair when I read that.
Yeah, but I so then it got, then all of a sudden, there's a huge buzz happening, which I knew was going to happen. And then out of the blue, I mean, it sold like 50,000 records. It was really good at that time, but still for an independent record, And all of a sudden, out of the blue, these major labels just start going crazy. Like, all of a sudden, both Warner Brothers and Universal are like doing this insane bidding, where it's partly politics about who was involved in it, because the A&R guy had left Warner Brothers and started his own thing, and he had signed a bunch of big bands with Warner Brothers. So it was a bit of that going on as well. But the bidding war became insane. And I was, in there trying to sign the band early on because I could see where they could get really big, but I was also very fearful that if they go to a major label directly, they could fuck. I've seen it happen a million times. They could fuck that up really bad. I love this band so much. I didn't want to see that happen. So I was trying to negotiate a deal where we do at least like one more record. A bit selfishly too, because I love the band so much. But it just worked out where it went crazy. And then Rick Sales, who manages Slayer and Gojira, and he's a very good friend of mine. He ended up managing the band, which is good because at least I knew, Rick knows how to work all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I talked to him about the deal because they got a ridiculously stupid deal, which is the other thing that scared me too, because like they got the kind of deal, like if they don't come out and sell, 250, 300,000 records, they're done. Like they're done, and that's the end of it. I didn't want to see any of that stuff happen because I've seen it happen so many times before. But to Rick's credit and Kristen at their management company, they did a really incredible job of managing through that whole thing. Making a record, having the expectations, having the gigantic advance, and and not having the original fans completely turn their back on the band. And to be fair, Tobias, who's obviously the main guy, is a really incredibly smart guy. And he's, probably the biggest reason why they are where they're at is because he's smart, he knows what he's doing, and he's cultivated this amazing thing. But the one thing I love about Ghost, and you don't get this a lot, is you either love them or you hate them. There's really no in between. There's very few people that go, yeah, they're okay. It's mostly like, I absolutely love them or I can't stand them. It's like and I love that because it's a reaction, right? You want a reaction. I don't want to have put out a record and go, yeah, it's okay. We'll give it 3.5 out of 5 stars, something like that. And then you're in mediocre land and it means nothing. But you want somebody to go, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, or I don't like it at all. So that's that's kind of where Ghost is. Although I have converted quite a few people when they opened for Iron Maiden. I think that was a huge point in their career because they were they're moving up the ranks and doing their thing, but they still had some people liked them, some people really hated them. I took a few friends, so they went to. I'm an Iron Maiden fanatic, so I probably went to 10 of those shows when they played in the U.S. And I made sure that some of my friends who did not like Ghost or didn't get it, I said, go early. I promise you will like it. If you don't like it, fine. You blame me and I'll buy you a bunch of drinks or whatever. But go early, and they got a lot of conversions, and you could see it in the crowds too, because typically they come out like they're fans up front are like, yeah, this is really great. There's rest of the audience, especially Iron Maiden audiences, it's like, yeah, whatever. But by you'd see halfway through the show like, oh, this is kind of good. So there's a little bit more of a reaction, and by the end of the show, you look at the crowd and like 80% of them have their hands in the air and stuff. So yeah, great band. I mean, there was a point I mentioned in the book where it really kind of bummed me out. The music business kind of bummed me out on that one because I love that band so much. I really wanted to work with them. And when we didn't, there was a minute where I was like, I'm just fucking sick of this stuff, But I think if they had not gone on to the success, I would have been really bummed out about it. But they've done amazing.
Oh,
They
yeah.
continue amazing. They're very nice, and they're taking Amon Amarth out on the road here in the U.S. Please go see it. Tour started yesterday. They're playing sheds all over the country. It's a great package. So yeah, it's all good.
Tell us what is your opinion on the health of metal? I've got a 15-year-old son who's turning me on to bands that I would have never known existed because I'm old and I'm set in my ways and I'm not necessarily exploring much anymore. But one of your bands, 200 Stab Wounds, is a band that he loves, and through him I've discovered 200 Stab Wounds. Fugitive out of Texas is a great band. It seems to me like there is a healthy climate for metal, and it's being led by this new generation. So talk to me first about 200 Stab Wounds, and then the new generation of metal bands as a whole.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I'm glad you brought them up because I was going to bring them up at some point. First of all, I think that the health of metal is incredible. I mean, I don't know that it's been in a better position long term than it is now, where you've still got the legends still out there for the most part at a high level. You've got the next set of bands, just like we're talking about, Amon Amarth and Ghost and Lamb of God and Gojira and Mastodon, and all these bands that are upping. They're playing arenas now and they're upping their game. And now you've got this incredible scene of young bands, mostly all in their 20s, that are coming out doing a wide variety of really incredible music. And it's kind of blowing me away by, number one, how good they are, and number two, what the buzz is. And with this band like with 200 Stab Wounds, we were trying to sign them, and there was a pretty good buzz on a bunch of different labels, and it was kind of a little more difficult than we thought it was going to be because the buzz was out there. And so we gave and every day the label we to sign them. I said, they're great, let's do it. And so we probably offered them a little more money than we were comfortable with, but we felt there's something here. So then fast forward to they played Psycho Fest here in Vegas summer before last. And I'd only seen the video stuff, and you can only get so much of watching a video on YouTube, right? So I go, I'm old, I've seen, 6,000, 7,000 shows. Nothing much new really excites me. I can go, oh yeah, that band's cool. But I was floored by how good they were, just floored. They reminded me so much of early Cannibal Corpse, and just the energy from the crowd, the energy they have. And they're very much crossed between Cannibal Corpse and Power Trip, where they've got that, very thrashy elements, kind of Power Trip. Fugitive, you mentioned as well. Blake, who's a phenomenal guy for Power Trip and Fugitive. Both of those bands are playing in Dallas on the 19th, which I'm going to go to that show, Southside Ballroom, in between the Metallica shows. But yeah, there's something really great happening there, and the buzz on them is incredible. We're about to release the new record fairly soon. It's really good. It's the right record for them to make. It's still very underground sounding, which is great, but the buzz on them is insane. And they're so incredible live. In fact, that show they're doing in Texas, they're actually playing with the Monomarth in Omaha, which I was trying to get to, but I don't think I can, which is really great because I didn't even know Monomarth or anybody from that camp knew who they were, but they're Monomarth's playing a couple off dates. So we're playing with them, and then Metallica invited them because Metallica is doing these weekends in a few cities where they're having a bunch of bands play on the Saturday in between the Friday and Sunday shows, and then we're also playing the parking lot, I think, on the Sunday show. And they have Tuten Stab Wounds is doing the show in Dallas, which is, I didn't know anybody at Q Prime or Metallica had anything. I said I'm overdue to send a text to Lars and just saying thank you for helping us out with this band. But yeah, they're really great. I'm so excited about them, and there's so many other bands too coming up. There's Capra, there's Ingested. We just put out this record that kind of came out of nowhere. It's a little bit older guys that kind of been around, called Zenith Passage. And we weren't really sure. They put out one record before, like years ago. They kind of reformed. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And it's like the number 55 record on the Billboard chart. Just the number 2 on the metal chart, number 3 on the 5 on the something like that on the independent chart, out of nowhere. And the record's incredible. It's very much like it's Watchtower-esque, I'll say, maybe. It's very progressive. But the reaction on that record has just kind of blown me away because I thought it was really great, but I didn't realize that reaction was going to be like this. And you're seeing that with a lot of these bands coming out. Another band, which is another one of these bands, you either get it or you don't, is Sleep Token. And that band's friggin' massive, just out of nowhere. Their last record came out on iTunes. I was looking at the iTunes chart, and they were like number 3 on the overall iTunes chart, which is just kind of mind-boggling. There's another band called Black Braid that's this single Native American guy that's just incredible. Like the buzz on them also is incredible. So I can't remember the last time I've seen where metal, especially new metal bands, there's so many of them out there with such a big buzz and like doing like real numbers when it comes to albums and chart position stuff. Because a lot of times it would take us 10, 15 years sometimes to break bands. And now you're seeing these bands get to that point a lot quicker. So yeah, to answer your question finally is, I think the state of metal right now is phenomenal.
Yeah. My son plays that 200 Stab Wounds, and the drummer is who stands out to me. It's just like, oh my God, this guy is ridiculously good.
Yep.
And we're huge Fugitive fans in this house. We listen to anything Blake Ibanez does. We've had Blake on the show a couple times, and he's a great guy, total sweetheart, immensely talented. And I like what he's doing with Fugitive. So
yeah, I'm in Dallas a lot because I have an apartment out there because we deal with a lot of bands out there and King Diamond's out there. So I've become good friends with both Blake and Nick from Power Trip, and Blake's from Fugitive. Just great guys, and it's really fun because they're same day they're younger guys, late 20s, and it's just fun to talk to them about music and where they're at, and they're super great guys, and and that Fugitive 200 Stab show I'm really looking forward to on the 19th. So
once again, I feel like these bands are under the banner of crossover. I feel like they're very in touch with, when we talk to Blake, it's like, Possessed comes up,
and Cro-Mags,
hardcore bands come up, and like the marriage of all of that is like it's going into his ears, through cooking in his brain and coming out of his hands when he writes a song, and I'm just ecstatic that, I'll confess, I'll be the first guy to stand up and go, there's so much new stuff coming out. My head is spinning. I can't keep up with any of it. It's just too, and like Dave said, I'm not searching for it anymore because I'm just like, what? And I fall asleep. It's just old man shit, I guess. But I'm just so happy that this is the reality and this is where we are. I want to, before Dave can get another word in, I want to do this. This is kind of full circle now. And I believe you mentioned it in the later book where you know, that quote from someone like, yeah, me and my friends used to just go to the record stores after school and on the weekends, and we either looked at the cover and I go, I bet that's on Metal Blade, and turn it around and it's on Metal, and we would just buy anything and everything that was on Metal Blade, whether, you know, it looked odd or you know, that we thought that, ooh,
Thank you.
yeah, for a first grader painted.
Thank you.
Yeah, that goes back to you.
Right.
A first grader painted this album cover, and I'm going to buy it anyway. So
Yeah, pretty much.
it's almost kind of what we looked for. If it had bad cover art, just some dragon with a lady in its mouth, or fire, or just some like big dumb evil devil, or
Well,
whatever.
yeah, I mean that goes back to, you know, when I grew up in the '70s, and, you know, kind of before, you know, it's hard to discover bands. So half the time I just go to the record stores and just look for covers that look like metal bands. In fact, the first time I ever saw Rush, I saw this cover for 2112, and I go, "Oh, that looks like it might be metal," and I bought it. It's the same thing with a bunch of other album covers of bands. I thought, "Oh, that may be like Triumph or whatever it was." That I didn't know who they were. I just thought that might be metal, and most of the time it was. So it kind of carries over, I think, to the present day. It's just, you know, still, obviously we're selling a lot of vinyl these days, which is great, but it's still the cover, no matter if it's vinyl or whatever it is. It's still super important.
I think Jason's point was that beyond the cover art, what we used to look for, the stamp of credibility, was the Metal Blade logo.
Yeah.
It was like, forget everything else. Does it say Metal Blade Records on it? I'm taking it home if it does.
No, that's very nice, and again, I appreciate that. And I mean, look, I'm just lucky the fact that what I like, other people seem to like. I mean, it's really as simple as that. It could, if my taste wasn't very good, I guess we probably wouldn't be talking now. But luckily, whatever I like, other people seem to like. And
Metal Blade is
reason.
yeah, Metal Blade is and was. And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm done.
The important thing to me to realize, because you've been on here 2 fucking hours already. So listen.
Yeah, I just noticed that.
Yeah.
We're going to cut you.
It happens, and we appreciate it very, very much. But I just want to say that
you didn't warn me; it might take a while, so I cleared some time.
Okay, cool. We appreciate it. Is the fact that Metal Blade is now and always has been a developmental label, someone who is ready to nurture from the ground up and give advice and talk to a young band or a group of older guys or whatever, to talk about what might be and could be, and not limited to, the best ideas to keep your integrity, your viability, the way to move, the next move for what it is that we have, even if it's a demo band or something that you want to reissue or something that you want to build upon. It's a creative stamp that you've got for your ability to sort of pick and choose, and then sometimes what you pick and choose, someone just has more money than you do. So,
well, yeah, there's always that, which, you know, that is what it is. But yeah, I mean, look, the most important thing, the most fun thing for me, and another reason why I don't want to sell this thing, is that it's always been from day one. It's just turning people on to music they haven't heard. And so, you know, finding the band, developing the band, seeing people like the band, then going on to see them have a career and have them be able to, like, actually make money off of music, and, you know, have, you know, a house and a car and wives and kids. And that's the most fulfilling thing to me. It's great to see that from step one to you know, however many years band. I think that's why, you know, bands like Cannibal Corpse and Amon Amarth and have spent their whole career with us.
yeah.
Because of some of that. And that's the most gratifying thing to me, and that's, you know, one of the most important things to me. And, you know, we try to do things the right way. We're one of the few labels that actually pays all their artists, which costs a lot of money, by the way, but it's good. They deserve it, and it should be that way.
I wanted to ask real quick, and then we'll let you go. You keep mentioning your staff. How many people work at Metal Blade Records? I want to get a sense of. I want to understand. You know,
multiple offices though.
So we've got. I hope I can get the math all right. I might be off by one or two, but we've got about. I think we've got about 18 people in the U.S. And most of them are still in Los Angeles. I don't know why they want to stay there, but I had to get out of there with the traffic and everything else. But they're mostly still in LA. But couple of scattered. We've got somebody in New York now, and a couple other spots. We've got one person in Canada. We've got 2 people in the UK. I believe our office in Germany, which is our home office in Europe, now consists of, I think, 11 people. And then we've got a half a person in Australia, and I think we're starting to do more stuff again in Japan, which was a really great market for us for a long time. I had Metal Blade Japan for many years, but then the whole state of everything switched over there, where it used to be import bands were really big, and now it's more domestic stuff. So we're getting a foothold in there. So whatever that amounts to, like 30 some odd people, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I just wanted a ballpark because I had no idea. I mean, obviously you're smaller than some big corporation, but
yeah. But we also, not to cut you off, but we also utilize our distributor. It's the Orchard, which is owned by Sony, and we use them, for like radio people and a bunch of other. So we've got a whole staff of people over there that we've worked with that help us too. So it's one thing people say, what do you need an independent label for? What do you need a label for anymore, right? Well, in essence, that's true. Anybody could make their own music and put it out there, but you need people to promote it. And kind of where we've evolved as a label is, we still provide all the same services, accounting, and helping bands find recording and dealing with the managers and all that sort of stuff. But the bulk of what we do in terms of our marketing and promotion, we have a huge social media staff, and that's really become the lifeblood for us, is getting this stuff out there on whatever means it is, because we've learned that it's a direct conduit to the fans, and we help the bands with their socials as well, because before you would rely on a magazine or a radio station or a third-party entity to get the word out there of what's going on. But now we can go direct to the fans. And look, we still need those third-party people as well. But in essence, when you sign with a label, you're getting an army of at least 150 people that are going to be helping your band to get where you need to go, as opposed to doing it yourself, where then you have to hire them all out. So anyway,
right.
That's my soapbox now.
In effect, it's the new version of tape trading.
Kind of, sort of. I mean, look, from my perspective, things haven't changed a lot in the 41 years I've been doing it. Still, the baseline is about, signing bands we like and putting it out there to the world so that hopefully other people.
That's where I was going with the developmental. It's like, that's your motive day one. It's still the same motive. You just have a slightly bigger machine able to do it. And
and to your point, sorry to cut you off, but to your point earlier about all these great bands and how they kind of the crossover thing, and what I've always told bands is that it's okay to have your influences, but don't sound like them. Like, we have Killswitch Engage, we have Black Dog. We don't need a copycat of that. We don't need a Lamb of God copycat band. Like, it's okay to have those bands as your influences, or whatever it is. But take those influences and make the music you want to make as a human, like what you would want to hear from a band, and make sure that it's not doesn't sound too much like the other bands. And like all these bands we just mentioned, they're in tons of influences, and you can say like, oh, they take part from here, part from there, part from there. But what comes out is all original, and that's, I think, the big key and why you're seeing so many of these bands now being so good, because that's what they're doing. Like, they don't sound like anybody else. You can't say, Black Braid doesn't sound like anybody else, really. They have their own sound, or even Sleep Token, all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. Well, Brian, can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today. Probably more time than you planned on spending.
It didn't feel like it was that long, though. So that's
good. Then we accomplished our goal. We like to make these things very conversational, and before you know it, a couple of hours have gone by. I do want to close by saying, number one, thank you for your time today. Number two, thank you for all you've done for heavy metal. I appreciate and applaud your tenacity, your perseverance. I love the fact that you take such pride and ownership of the Metal Blade name and brand, that you're not willing to sell it out as long as you're living and breathing. You're going to maintain control over this baby that you created and turned into a monster. And I think we all benefit from that. So thank you for just doing what you do. It's an incredible success story. We didn't even get to the vodka or your museum or many other things.
Antique mall store that you have there. We didn't talk about. There's so many things.
I'll just go to metalblade.com for all that good stuff. But I appreciate all the kind words. I mean, look, ultimately, I'm still just a fan, and that's, I'm honored to be able to do this, and it's, thanks to you guys and everybody else out there, they're making me able to do it.
Yeah. And real quick, where can people get your books? Also metalblade.com?
Yeah, so the books are anywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, metalblade.com, a lot of books, a lot of like actual brick and mortar bookstores have it. So yeah,
Right.
pretty much anywhere, but definitely Amazon or Metal Blade for sure has it.
Okay. And the titles are Swing of the Blade, and the previous one is
For the sake of heaviness. Correct.
Yes,
I
2017
saw on
and
Saint Song.
2023. Brian Slagel, thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of my co-host, Jason McMaster, I'm Metal Dave Glessner, with our guest today, Brian Slagel of Metal Blade Records on the Talk Louder podcast.
Thank you, guys.